Hey, that's pretty good.
It's Mrs. Kindly, whistled Thomas.
And now we finally get to the very first B-tier story. We have a long list to go, trust me. But this is a good one. This one I just really find nice. And what's really neat about the story Mrs. Kindly's Christmas is this, where in Thomas's Christmas Party, it only shows briefly the story. But they don't do Thomas's Christmas Party as a Railway series book until Wilbur Awdry did in 1984 in an annual story, which I'm not putting in the list because I personally haven't read the book, so I don't own a copy. But I think it's just an extended version of the season 1 episode. But aside from that, yeah, this story is actually just pretty good and pretty solid. One that I really like, and one that is just really nice to read. Overall, a good one. And it's nice to see Mrs. Kindly as a character, so yeah, a sweet one. Moving on to the next one.
Passengers get ices.
Yeah, sadly, out of all the Narrowgauge stories in Wilbur's books, this might be the least favorite one. But good. Not bad, just good. What can I like about this story? Duncan grumbling about things that are changing in the Skarloey Railway. And yeah, I think that's kind of the theme in here, is after all the new things happen with Sir Handel, Peter Sam, and then Skarloey realizing that Rhaenys is going to return soon, Duncan, on the other hand, is just like, what about me? Well, I've worked hard enough, I deserve something in life. And he doesn't really get that. What happens is, he has to help out Skarloey when one of his coaches derails and pull a passenger train. He's stubborn, he's miserable, he behaves so miserably that he just stops in the viaduct, and then Skarloey has to rescue him. And that's the story. Also, I like how they introduced Nancy, and how she actually became a recurring character in Wilbert's books. Such a shame she was in the TV series, but that's at least something I appreciate in the books. But yeah, not really one of my favorites. Just a good story. And that's about it. On to the next one.
Tunnels should be tunnels and not rabbit holes.
Home at Last is a nice, good story. But unlike the TV version, this one's introduces more things about the Skarloey Railway with a story. I love how the Skarloey Railway world builds as it goes on. Skarloey returns and he's wondering what's happening. Rusty's introduced, Peter Sam explains everything. They got new coaches, 3 open coaches, a guards band, and 2 class coaches for Sir Handel. And all that leads up to the Duncan story. His introduction. He wedges himself in a tunnel due to his carelessness of rocking and rolling, and like that, Skarloey has to save the day, and Duncan gets scolded by the Thin Controller. I really love the first half, but the second half is just good. I like it. It's just a good story. On to the next one.
What do you mean by leaving me behind?
Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady is a pretty fun story, a simple and good one that I actually really like. But there's only one thing that everyone talks about that is easily the best part of the story. So when the guard blows his whistle and accidentally leaves the Refreshment Lady behind, well, let's just say that at some point in the year 1952, when a certain clergyman went to visit the railway, he blew the guard's whistle too early and left the Refreshment Lady behind. It was Wilbur Awdry, I know. How funny is that he just included that in his own story? Him, the author, literally said, I put my own mistake in there. That's just hilarious. I love it. Oh my god, I love the Railway series. You could just tell I just really love this series. It's a pretty good one. Also, one thing I really like about the story is Jerk Henry. Henry just being an absolute dick towards Peter Sam for absolutely no reason. Okay, maybe because Peter Sam was a tad late. But in the end, just seeing Henry chortle away and leaving Peter Sam confused, my god, like, what an absolute dick. But that's why I love Henry. He's such a character. Anyway, on to the next batch. Troublesome Engines is a good book. Just good. And the very first story is also good. But there's some things I actually really like in this book. First off, this is the startup of the Troublesome Engines saga, unlike the TV series where it starts off with the next story. But in here, this one's a pretty nice one. I like how it's also shown that Henry, of all characters, is the first engine to encounter this whole troublesome thing, and it's a pretty fine story. What's strange is the episode itself was adapted in season 4, and they kind of played it off as either it took place after Henry was newly built, which is fine in canon for the TV series, I don't mind. But the fact they have Duck in the sheds at the end, no, that just ruins everything. Boo, sucks now. But overall, it's a pretty fine, solid story for the start of Troublesome Engines. Now the next one, on the other hand... Now this is the next story, the one that has Gordon and James be the ones that are Troublesome Engines at the end. I think it's a pretty fun one with Gordon, where he just refuses to move properly on the turntable pretty well so he can spin around, and he doesn't, and he has to pull the train backwards. That's pretty funny. I think Trampy did it so much funnier in that scene. And then with James, he just spins around the turntable like a top. Which again, when Trampy did it, oh my god, it was super, super funny. Oh my god. Though it wasn't in that adaptation, it was in a different one. But still, my point is, Trampy just makes those scenes too funny. But overall, I like how at the end of the story, that this is the one where Gordon says, you know what, everyone, we're going on strike. And the big engine's like, yep, we're going on strike unless we get a tank engine. And like that, pretty good one. I really like it. It's good. On to the next one.
Perhaps it was instinct.
I'm as surprised as you are that the anticlimactic James Ereditgen ending arc story is actually good. I know, right? You thought it was going to be C tier. But no, I actually don't mind the story as a good one. And one thing I really appreciate about it is how much Gordon really is to all the engines, saying that he's boastful and he thinks he knows it all, but then makes the foolish mistake by being set to the loop line, and now James gets to pull the express, which he finally does, and I think it's pretty nice that he finally did it. It's a nice end to James's story, yes, and honestly, the end of his arc, and it's very anticlimactic, but hey, at least it's good. Not okay, just good. On to the next one.
Move.
Edward the Blue Engine might be one of the good stories ever made in my entire life. One that I really enjoyed reading. And the first one, well, it's just a fine story that's pretty good. This one is just nice. I love the cast in this one. I really love how Edward is shown as an old yet reliable engine. I love how the big engines are teasing Edward just because. And I love how Toby stands up to Edward like that. Pretty cool seeing the two old engines interact, which I don't think was a thing in the series afterwards. I don't know why. But one thing I do appreciate is how Gordon and Henry, how they just make an ass of themselves, and how Percy is the one that saves the day. Good for Percy being there. And of course, Edward getting the last laugh and teasing the big engines is easily the funniest part in the story. I love it. I love old Edward. He's just one of my favorites. Alright, on to the next one.
Oh dear, what can the matter be?
This might be the least Edward-centric story in his book, but I actually really like this one slightly more than Cow's in my opinion. Just slightly. Why? Bertie. Yeah, I really like how Bertie is brought back into the Railway series in this story. And of course is one that is just pretty fun. And I like how he's helping out Thomas while his fireman isn't available. And Bertie goes on this whole chase around the main line just to catch up to Edward, who would eventually go to his branch line. It's very nice. I like it. It's a pretty good story, and one that is just really fun. And I like how the passengers cheer for Bertie. It also really shows about Bertie's character that, yeah, he may be one of those buses that would tease the engines and think he's more suitable, but it shows he has a good heart nonetheless. He's always helping a friend in need. On to the next one.
There's no danger.
Ah, yes. One of the first Coldfell stories I'll be talking about, Danger Points. I feel like in a way this is kind of like the story Home at Last or Sir Handel in a way. Where in this one, alright, new things are happening in the Coldfell Railway. Nice. We get 3 new engines, but only one is a character, and his name is Lord Harry. Lord Harry kind of reminds me of Sir Handel and Duncan combined, where both are just stubborn, grouchy engines that think they know what to do, and only make the situation worse later on. Which in this case, he derails in some points, which is part of the terminus line, meaning that both tracks are blocked. Whoops, that's not a good sign. But hey, a neat story about Lord Harry, And sadly, he doesn't get his name. He's just going to be called number 6. Or will he? Well, I can't say anything more. I'll just spell the next story a couple more lists later. On to the next one.
Sir Handel had been naughty.
Sir Handel, oh Sir Handel, how he was introduced with Peter Sam in the Railway series. A pretty fun story nonetheless. I really just enjoy Sir Handel as a character. He's not one of my favorite narrow gauge engines, but he's up there as one of the narrow gauge engines I enjoy so much in the series. One thing I really appreciate about Sir Handel is he's just a grouch. He's grumbling, he's miserable, he hates life, he hates the coaches he has to pull. He's very high class with Gordon that makes him speechless. And when he has to pull trucks, he just refuses to do so. One thing that's pretty different in the book is it's the next day he pulls the trucks, unlike the TV series where it's just the same day. And I like how before he had to pull trucks, he was scolded by the Thin Controller for causing havocs with the coaches. So yeah, a pretty good one. I like it. It's just a very fine story and one that I really appreciate. On to the next one.
Trucks? I won't, so there.
Ah yes, the very first narrow gauge story illustrated by John T. Kenny. Can I just say I really love his illustrations with the narrow gauge stories along with the other one we'll get to eventually. Yeah, I really love it. So the story of trucks. I like how it's a Sir Handel Peter Sam story, I like how Rusty's introduced, and this is the infamous one where Peter Sam had his dreadful accident with trucks and smashed his funnel. Yikes. We'll get to his funnel story much later, but all I gotta say is it's a pretty good one, and you do feel bad for Peter Sam. It wasn't his fault, it's Sir Handel. And I like how this is Gordon just giving bad advice to small engines just to make the situation worse. I love that. Gordon, what a scamp. On to the next one.
He's bumped us.
Bucking Bronco is just a fun, good story. So, after Skarloey learned his lesson in the previous story, he manages to pull his coaches, which are actually introduced in this series. And I gotta say, when I first read this, it was just pretty cool that these coaches lasted ever since Skarloey arrived on Sodor. That's cool. But Skarloey only had one major flaw, and that is, he didn't have a back pony truck, which meant whenever he was pulling coaches or moving, he would sometimes wobble. And at one incident, he accidentally made the manager fall into a bush. Oh dear. You do feel bad for Skarloey because he really is trying and he didn't do it intentionally on purpose, but they decided to modify Skarloey by giving him a cab and a pony truck, which is pretty neat actually. I like this as a lot of new things are going to happen and it would be for the better. Good story. Like this one. On to the next one. The miniature railway engines. Some of the stories I just find really good. And this one is just really fun. Useful Railway itself, the final story. There's a lot of neat things I really like about this story in particular. I like how the engines are quite insulted that people assume they're a tiny toy railway, which technically they can kind of see the point, but it is an actual railway that is established and one that I find pretty underrated. Another thing I really like about the story is it's a Rex story. One of the funny things about Rex himself is he thinks he can handle pulling wool trains very easily, as it is his favorite job. Though Farmer Willie gets all careless when he's driving his tractor and accidentally drops his load of wool onto the rails, leading Rex to a serious accident, which you do feel bad for him. Even if Mike does tease him a bit because Rex was boastful about it, you still feel bad for him. And in the end, the two engines save Rex, and the controller, Mr. Fergus Duncan, appreciates their railway for what they are. It's a bittersweet ending, mind you, and one that I just really like. But we still have one other story from the miniature railway that I also find pretty good. On to the next one.
Try to whistle, of course. Shut up. You're jealous.
Mike's Whistle is another really fun story. No, seriously, it is. It's good. I like it. And I really like the small railway engine stories pretty much. But what is there to say about this one? I really like how Duck is the focus in the conflict where something bad happened to his whistle, and he just feels embarrassed about it. Mike, who takes whistles very seriously, tends to get all snappy, and like that, he had to pull a passenger train instead of ballast. And Mike, I just love the fact that he's just pissed a lot. Like, he gets so stubborn with passengers, has to blow his whistle obnoxiously, and then when a cow's on the line, he whistles so loud that it shoots like a rocket, which, gee, I wonder if that reminds me of that season 6 episode, something to do with the Narrowgauge engine, which, yeah, that episode is actually based off this story, and I think it's pretty neat that that the TV series decided, hey, why not base something from a Railway series story? Like, we can't use the miniature engines from the model series, so let's just spin it in the Narrowgauge story. Why not? And in the end, it's just a fun story. I like how the passenger's the one that saves the day. Rex and Bert tease Mike, and Mike gets humiliated. Oh, and Duck has his whistle cleaned out. Very nice. But just a fun story. On to the next one.
And you are not a pop star.
Ah, this is one I actually really like that's good. A conflict story between a Steamy and Diesel, though it's very different. Instead of the steam engine being the good guy and the diesel being the bad guy, it's the diesel being the good guy and the steam engine not being so good, but at the end makes amends with the diesel. So unlike the Duck and the Diesel story, I love how this one is very handled well. Duncan is rude to Rusty for absolutely no reason, he's just rude to him. He hears James about diesels and James gives him awful advice, and then Duncan derails when he's acting carelessly on the rails. And what's really fascinating is that scene with Skarloey and Rusty. Rusty refuses to help Duncan because he's rude, but I love how Skarloey, of all engines, is snappy at Rusty for ignoring Duncan, especially due to the passengers, and then Rusty decides to help out at the end. And like that, Duncan and Rusty made amends, and this is very nice. I like how the books, they form the amends, and it stays consistent. Unlike the TV series that forgot that was a thing at some point. But overall, a pretty good story, one that I like, and we still got one more in the Little Old Engine books. On to the next one.
Oh dear, someone squashed it.
You know, it's weird. Like, I love the episode, but the story is just good. Why is that? I don't know, maybe the TV version just did it 1,000 times better, but I still like the story nonetheless. It's a good one. Things I really appreciate about the story is, well, Peter Sam. How this is the one where he loses his funnel, uses a steel pipe for a funnel, and then has a new Giesel funnel which works out better. And it shows how Rusty's doing maintenance work. That's basically what happens in the story, and it's good. I like it, it's just the story just fine. But let's be real, if I was in the TV series version, it would be most likely S tier on the list. We're not doing TV series, we're doing the book series, so it's different. Still good, like this one. On to the next one.
So you're bound for the wee railway.
Ah yes, Crosspatch. Another fun and good story. Can I just tell you how much I really love Very Old Engines? Great book, one of my favorites, but stories, they're just good, if I'm gonna be completely honest. Don't worry, I really love these stories. They're just pretty good, okay? So yeah, Crosspatch. This is the story that introduces something quite new. The origins of Skarloey and Rheneas, which I think is very suitable near the end of the Wilbur Awdry books. Right there. And I gotta be honest, his story is pretty fun. I love how it starts off as Skarloey being a young, chipper, impatient, stubborn, basically the polar opposite of the Skarloey we all know and love, and introduces an engine named Neil, who was one of the first engines on Sodor, which I find very nice. And what happens? Skarloey is tasked to pull trucks, and he refuses to, and gets cheated at the end. That's the story. I love it. I love when we show a flawed version of Skarloey from his olden days, showing that some of the wisest and oldest characters we all love to cherish weren't like that in their very young days. And that's pretty neat that we see some character growth as time goes on. Overall, really good story. On to the next one.
You should get one like me and be up to date. No, thank you. You look like a snail with that house on your back.
Stick in the Mud is just fun. I love it. So after Skarloey got a new pony truck and cab, he is very boastful to the engine Rheneas. And unlike his counterpart, Rheneas is the younger, serious character that just likes to get work done and takes no jokes out of hands. On one rainy day, Skarloey's pulling a passenger train and gets stuck in mud, and Rheneas refuses to do so because he doesn't like Skarloey. I love that one illustration where the drivers are like, yeah, we have to keep them separate, so we have to face them backwards in the shed. That's just good humor, I love it. And at the end, Rheneas does rescue Skarloey, and even how ridiculous Skarloey looks all covered in mud, Rheneas for the first time laughs it off, and they finally become good friends. I love this conclusion to the original stories of Skarloey and Rheneas, and a very nice one. But we still have one story that is definitely better and good. Just wait and see.
Killy something indeed.
Ah, yes, my favorite of the Little Engine stories, and one that was only exclusive in the books. Where do I begin with so many good things about this story? One, I love how it sets up everything with Sir Handel and Peter Sam, where they mention like people taking notes and photographs, and they fear like in their old railway, something bad's gonna happen. Like their railway would close and they'll have to be sold. Something seems fascinating about the lore. They tell everyone about it, they feel bad about the engines, but then it turns out, no, they're not being sold. In fact, what's actually happening is they're gonna film the Skarloey Railway on the BBC television, which is a nice homage to when the Tallyclin Railway did that. And I gotta say, this is just mind-blowing. Like, the fact that a TV company decided to film the Skarloey Railway as a very nice railway attraction for people to visit is just wonderful. I just love it. And hey, good for Peter Sam, he gets to pull a television train. I think he really deserves it. Like, seriously, Peter Sam is like one of the softest and nicest characters. Good on for you, Peter Sam. I also really love the Sir Handel side of the story, where he just complains about television being like an outdated thing. Okay, that's pretty funny. I love Sir Handel. And I just love how the Thing Controller spooks him by telling him he's gonna be dismantled to pieces because he doesn't feel well. Yeah, that really spooks Sir Handel. I love it. And it's really nice that Skarloey got to pull the passenger train and mention something else. He mentioned his brother from the Tallyclin Railway named Tallyclin, another real-life engine introduced to the series. There's just so much I really love about this story. I really appreciate it for what it is. We still got one other story that's similar to this and it's slightly better, but man, this is a really good one. One that I really love to read. On to the next one.
And now he's scrapped. Oh dear, oh dear.
Oh yeah, did I forget to mention this is another story with a lot of setups to Sir Handel Peter Sam? I guess I haven't, right? This is another brilliant story that I appreciate. So when Duck arrives to tell Peter Sam about the Dukes being scrapped, Peter Sam is mortified and thinks it's going to be terrible. But as for Skarloey's 100th birthday with Rheneas, it's going to go pretty well. This time it's Rheneas that's pulling the passenger train, and Peter Sam is the one that's pulling the BBC train, which is very wholesome. And when the Duke arrives, Peter Sam thinks it's an actual, engine, but instead, it's not. It's a person that's a Duke. And I just love how disappointed Peter Sam looks in the illustration. And in the end, Skarloey and Rheneas talk about their old railway at the Tallyclin, and how that railway is very successful for their 100th birthday. A very somber, sweet, and wonderful story. One that I just love to read. It's good. I like it. But I love it more with its world building and setups. For a more complex book, I'll get to either an A or S tier. But as of now, just a good story with great setup. On to the next one.
Actually, I'm better. Goodbye.
And out of all the Narrowgauge stories that are put in this list that I consider good stories, this is my favorite. Now, there is one story that's going to be slightly much higher, and it's more of a introduction story. But hear me out in this one. This is just my favorite of the fun stories. Sir Handel is returned, and he talks about how he has his new wheels, and everyone makes fun of him, thinking he's like a steamroller. And then we get to this character named George. George is the funniest character and probably my favorite of the road vehicles. What's his character? Basically hates railways, and he's very anti-railway. He just hates everything railway-based. And when he encounters Sir Handel having his steamroller wheels, he just mocks him. But does Sir Handel just act like, oh no, that's so sad, so mean? No, he's like, actually, I'm better. Goodbye. And he just leaves. And what happens? George decides to have some competition and beef with Sir Handel. They both get into a reckless crash, and even funnier, and this is just only the book version, it's shown that both of the drivers are about to have a fist fight while they're still derailed. Like, that is just so hilarious. I love it. And then, like, the constable just breaks up the fight, so that's cool. And at the end, Sir Handel gets mocked, and after this kind of was like the end of Sir Handel with his stories, especially in Wilbert's books. He does appear a couple of times, sure, but this one is just too funny of a story. Alright, back to some standard gauge ones. I'm not getting into the controversy in this story. Anyway, moving on. So, this is a pretty good story about Henry, and I really like how it plays. So, Henry literally passes through a tunnel, and some boys drop some stones at him, and hurts the fireman in the head. Ooh, yeah, that's gotta hurt. Ouch. Yeah, actually, when I read that story, I was just like, oof. But then all of a sudden, Henry decides to get karma and sneezes at the boys, which, boy oh boy, that seems actually pretty funny. And you know what? It's a good one. I know I mentioned the other two stories from Henry the Green Engine are just okay. This one right here is a good one. It really shows that Henry stands up for himself and don't mess with Big Green. On to the next one.
Stop! You're making me giddy!
Wow, so many things introduced in this story, aren't there? I think this is a pretty fascinating book, mainline engines, and one that I absolutely love, but most of the stories I still find just good. And the first one is actually just good. So many things I really like about this story is this. One, the introduction of Bill and Ben. I really like how they're introduced in this story, and yeah, I think it's pretty neat. What's even more surprising is that their introduction to the actual Railway series was when they were first introduced in 1948 in the timeline. And this story takes place in 1965, which is pretty strange as we never got to see the twins interact with Edward before, not even in Edward the Blue Engine, which does take place on his branch line. And this is something I really appreciate about the story itself, is it introduces so many new things that we never saw in Edward's branch line. Random docks, the China clay pits, Bill and Ben, you name it. Like, there's a lot of expansion in this railway and on the branch line itself. But the one neat thing that this story really introduces is Boko of all characters. I really like how at first when you get to see him, you think he's like some big threat, but in actuality, no, he's not a threat. And in fact, he's just actually one of the nicer and hardworking diesels, and one that I really wish was so in-depth in the Railway series, because this engine class is actually pretty cool. Yes, of course, I do like the scene when Bill and Ben are teasing Boko. That's actually pretty funny. And Edward is the one that stops them and explains about who Boko actually is. Again, so many great things about this one story, and it's just a really good one. But we still got some more mainline engine stories to come much later. On to the next one.
He's got no dome. Never trust domeless engine.
Ah, Domeless Engines. Another really good story right there. There's so many things that are introduced in this story that's pretty nice. The one that everyone talks about is City of Truro, a real-life engine that actually visited Sodor once. And what's really neat about the book version of the TV version is that Duck is the one that is shy and nervous about meeting or talking to the famous visitor. But he does talk to him, and they have like a nice conversation about the Great Western Railway, which I think is very wonderful. But the coolest thing about it is Gordon. I love that there is some rivalry dynamic between the two, wondering which engine actually beat the 100-mile record. I don't know where I lean towards more, but I don't think it's necessarily City of Truro that beat the record. I think it's Flying Scotsman. But I love how Gordon tries it, and when he does, he lost his dome at the end. Pretty funny, wonderful story. Love that Duck is there, and it sets up a really nice arc for Duck, which we'll get to very soon, at some point, in B tier. Anyway, on to the next one.
Buzz, buzz, buzz.
Buzz Buzz is another really good story. And while I do like the TV series version just fine, I think I actually like the Railway series version a lot more, because it expands so many things. One thing I really love that it introduces is Boko and Duck, where even though that Boko is one of the new engines and he is considered a diesel, when Duck first met him he's very skeptical, but after hearing from Edward, he warms up to him and actually appreciates Boko for who he is, which is pretty great in Duck's character nonetheless, and one of the reasons why I actually like this story. Now let's just get to the one that steals the show himself, James. I really like how James is very snooty and very, very harsh towards diesels, which was a very common thing in Wilbert's books, and I guess kind of pushed into Chris's stories a bit, but yeah, this is actually just pretty fun. The only thing I would say is pretty dumb about this story is, who in the right mind would put a beehive in his big station? Like, seriously, who would do that? But in the end, it's like, well, what'd you think was gonna happen? Of course there's chaos. Though I will admit, James getting stung by a bee and the illustrations of the passengers are just absolutely hilarious. Though I kind of wish in that illustration when James was stung that his nose was red like they did in the TV series, but well. Also, another thing I really like about the Railway series version is once James leaves, Boko arrives to take James's express, and he just pulls the train. And at the end, everyone just laughs off at James for being a fool. It's very different from the ending from the TV series. But again, one that I just find pretty fun. Alrighty then, on to the next one. Yeah! Dirty Objects might be one of the funniest stories made, and I'm not exaggerating on that. I think it's just one of the funniest stories made. And the one thing that really stands out in the story is Toby. I love the contrast between James and Toby in the story, where James thinks he's all flashy and nice, but Toby just laughs it off or just teases James to piss him off even more. God, I really love this dynamic so much, it's just too funny. And of course, it's one of those, James makes an ass of himself, because of course he does, gets into an accident, and Toby gets the last laugh. I love it. I just love this story for how funny it is. It's a good story, really funny one. On to the next one.
The Fat Controller, whose name was Derek.
So, weirdly this was meant to be the original finale of the Railway series. Like, the original finale. And you know what? I'm glad it's not the finale, because we had a bunch more stories cooking up. But before we get to those ones, let's talk about this one right here. So, basically what happens is many people aren't sure if the engines on Sodor are real or not, so the Fat Controller decides to send them to the mainland, while other mainland engines come to help out and do the work while they're away, which is pretty fascinating. And we get to see Thomas being a reckless engine from time to time, which is a pretty good story nonetheless. But if I had to say one thing about this story, I think the TV series one did it slightly better. I don't know, I just kind of like the TV version. Though it introduces some new things, like Ginty and Pug being a thing, and I kind of wish there were more prominent characters like them that appeared more often, but oh well. And also, this is according to the narration from John, I think his last name is Gilgood, but he literally says that the Fat Controller's name is Derek, even though his actual name is Charles Topham Hatt, but maybe that's his middle name. I don't know. Point is, pretty good story, but definitely not finale worthy. There's a lot more stories to come. On to the next one.
Beep beep, hello.
Oh, what? Oh, sorry. I kind of dozed a bit. Wait, where are we at? Number 63 now? Oh boy, this list is long. Oh hey, we're in the final story of Tank Engine Thomas again, and I actually find this one pretty good. So yeah, I think this is probably the most fun story that Thomas ever had in the Railway series. Him interacting with a bus named Birdie, and they have a really nice friendly race. But what's really cool about this story, in my opinion, is thanks to this story, the Adria Sodor map is was just made. And it became one of the most canon and brilliant masterpiece things that Wilbur Awdry made in his own universe. But aside from that, yeah, it's a good story. I like it, just fun. I really like how Birdie has more expressions in the books and the show, which I get it, it's season 1. But overall, a really nice story about these two rivalries. And thankfully, Birdie had another story earlier, and he only appeared a few times in Chris's books, but it was nice. It's nice that Birdie wasn't just some one-off road vehicle character like most characters in the books, but yeah, pretty good one. On to the next one.
Percy, you must go whoosh and crash. Right, said Percy.
Oh, now we're in the other half of Branchline Engines, and I gotta be honest, these stories are just actually pretty good. And Percy's Predicament is just a fun story, where Percy's sick and tired of Daisy being a nuisance. Toby tries to cheer up Percy, and when Percy arrives at the quarry, this scene in particular where he's a runaway is just very suspenseful. I love how in the Railway series he nearly runs over a chicken and he's mortified. Like, poor guy. Like, I feel so bad for Percy in a lot of these stories. I get that this is kind of a theme with Percy's character in the branch line where he's very accident prone or things just happen to him. But in the end, he does at least go to the works, and you do feel bad for him. Like, he didn't intentionally cause the accident. It wasn't entirely his fault, but I can understand why the Fat Controller was a bit stubborn about it, having to have 2 engines run the branch line instead of 3. But when Thomas returned, Percy went back to the works, and everything's fine at the end. And hey, at least Daisy became a growing character that matured and did good after Percy's accident. So now she's a prominent engine that stays on Sodor. And in Chris's book, she actually becomes more relevant as a nicer and reliable character. Like, she probably might have her moments, but still a good character nonetheless. On to the next story.
Oh, get out of my way!
Wow, I can't believe right now we're finally in the other half of Troublesome Engines. What do you know? Yeah, I told you, B tier is so long. But we're still gonna do it. We're gonna do this, okay? Okay. So yeah, this story itself is one of the starter Percy stories that shows more of his character. Like, yeah, he was introduced as a cheeky scamp and one that was just pretty fun. But in this one, it really shows what happens when Percy goes a little bit too far. Now, technically, this wasn't Percy's fault. He didn't know, but I do like this part where Gordon, of all characters, even though that he spooked Percy and Percy ran away as fast as he could, I love that Gordon rescues Percy, showing that there's a little bit of good in that big, strong engine. Like, yeah, Gordon may be a pompous, rude engine, but I like the little moments where Gordon is nice, even if he is mostly pompous, but those little nice moments really show how much of a character he is. That's a nice, simple story with Percy, one that I really enjoy. Speaking of Percy...
And last night they said I have black wheels.
And now we finally get to the story that finally introduces one of the most favorite characters of all time, Percy. Yeah, this is a nice one. I like how everything is set up and everything like this. And it's a very ensemble story which has everyone. Edward gets some parts here and there, the 3 big engines get a thing, Percy's introduced, and Thomas is at the end. And honestly, all these characters combined together make this story so much fun. It's no wonder why it's my favorite story in Troublesome Engines, and one that I really appreciate. I also love how it shows that Percy spooked Henry, and the way that Johnny Morris does his narration with Percy spooking Henry is just pure gold. I love it. But overall, a pretty fun story, and one that I really like. And now we've finished all the stories from Troublesome Engines. Moving on to the next one.
Just seen a ghost.
Unlike the TV series with its spooky visuals of why it's great, this one is just a good, fun story about Thomas, Percy, and Toby. I don't know why, these stories are just kind of fun to me. And honestly, the fact that Tramway Engines wouldn't have existed if Duke the Lost Engine was the actual finale, it'd be a damn shame because I really like some of the stories in Tramway Engines, and this one is just a good, fun story. Yep, Percy just tells Thomas a ghost story, Thomas doesn't believe him, Percy gets into an accident, and then all of a sudden, Toby just plays along with Percy, and they just spook Thomas at the end. I love that illustration right there where Thomas looks mortified, Toby's laughing, and Percy just spooks him. That's comedy gold. I love it. Pretty good story, and really fun one. Well, on to the next one.
I hear you've lost your numbers.
The Twin Engines is a really good book. One that I actually really like to read from time to time. And most of the stories are just good. Here's the introduction one, Hello Twins. Nothing really happens in this story, if I'm going to be honest, but there are some good things that make the story good. One is, I love how it sets up the big engines grumbling about needing another engine, and Duck is just somewhere in the middle and just bantering with the big engines. Love that scene, that's my favorite part of the story. But what's also really fascinating is when the Fat Controller purchased an engine, he didn't realize that it was 2 engines he purchased, and he introduced them to Donald and Douglas, the Scottish twins, which they misplaced the whole number thing and just kind of act like, we don't know what happened. That's it. That's the story. And I just love it for that. It's a weird one, but it's pretty good. And on to the next story, we get to know more about the twins. Which, speaking of the next story...
Where's my coach?
Ah, yes. One of the stories that is really discussed a lot. Mainly because it was a cancelled episode in Season 2. Yeah, that's sad, I know. Why was it cancelled? I don't get it. I mean, yeah, maybe a bit confusing, but I don't hate the story. I actually think it's pretty good. Wait, what's the story again? Okay, so Donald and Douglas gain numbers, and they're working with Duck now, which I think is pretty cool. I like that this is the introduction to Duck being introduced with the twins, and it becomes quite a recurring thing in the books. I also love how Henry and Gordon are being rude to the twins with their whistles, and the twins just snap back. They're just ready for some bantering, and he just made Gordon and Henry scared. This also introduces the Wild Northwestern, which I think it's a pretty fun concept, and I wish it was used more often. And Thomas is in the story, and I just love how Douglas accidentally misplaces the coach, and all this scuffle leads to a bad scene. And like that, Donald comes up with a plan to swap the tenders. Like, yeah, I know it's not the smartest idea, and yeah, Douglas was caught at the end, but who cares? It's a fun story, and one that I really like. Overall, a good one. And man, I really wish this was an episode in Season 2. A great 3-parter story about the twins would have worked so well on the show. Such a shame this one was left off, and only 2 of the stories are used. Man, sad, right? Especially when it says especially when Thomas is involved. Oh! Just a heads up, yeah, the last story is not going to be in B tier. But this one is, at least, and it's Break Fan. One thing I really like about this story is that both twins have their own little mishaps. Donald with the signal box, and Douglas with the spiteful Break Fan. And I think the reason why I actually like this story is the introduction of the spiteful Break Fan. The spiteful Break Fan is just an ass. He's rude to everyone and has no care in the world. And after Donald has his accident in the signal box, it's James that has to interact with one of the twins. And what's even funnier, I just love how Douglas mentions the time James crashed into tar wagons, and he's pissed while everyone laughs at him. See, that's funny. But then after James was struggling with the trucks and the spiteful Break Fan was making things worse, Douglas came to help out James. Only for Douglas, when he's climbing up the hill, literally smashes the Break Fan to death. Wow. I am just baffled about this. And at the end, the Fat Controller is deciding which engine gets to stay and which one doesn't. But what's really sad is, despite the fact that Douglas is doing everything he could, he's the stowaway. He's the one that escaped with Donald. Donald was the actual engine brought in. And I wonder what would happen in the final story. Would one of the twins be sent packing? Or both? Or will they both stay? Find out in A tier. On to the next one.
Quack, quack, quack.
Donald's Duck is a simple yet very sweet story about, well, Donald. I think this one is just really nice to just read, you know? So in the story, Duck and the twins Donald and Douglas are establishing a little western as usual, and the railway is nearly complete. But after Duck's been so boastful, Donald decides to just chip her in and just be the jokey twin, the one that just teases others just for fun. And so Duck's driver pays him off by giving Donald a duckling in his tender cap, and it turns out it was a little duckling named Dilly, which Donald befriends the little duckling, and like that, it's just a sweet story. Donald does pay Duck out, and in the end, they just both win. It's a simple, sweet, wholesome story. One that I find pretty good. On to the next one.
Shunted, and on my own branch too. It's a disgrace.
Wow, it's nice to talk about Thomas again for once, but in a good story, and one that I find pretty fun. So, after Stepney arrives on Sodor, he talks to Edward about the Bluebell engines, and how he escaped from Scrap, which I think is the best part of the book if I'm being honest, because, yeah, they do mention the real-life railway so much more in the books than the TV show, but the real thing that stole the show here is Thomas. Thomas is absolutely jealous of Stepney, and I love it. I love how he's just very hot-tempered towards him, has no care about him being a famous engine, let alone a tank engine that works on the Southern Railway. But one of the fun things I like about it is how it's all set up. So it's at night, and a passenger on board decided to say, yeah, Thomas is not going to pull the train. Stepney is. And Thomas is like, what? And like that, Stepney just pulls the train and just leaves Thomas shocked, miserable, and pissed. And the next day when Stepney talks to Thomas about what just happened and how he actually appreciates Thomas for who he is, Thomas warms up to him. And like that, they form a good friendship. Stepney may not be a Sodor engine, he's just a visiting engine, but one that I think Thomas would appreciate as time goes on. And that's why I just find the story so good. Fun, but good. On to the next one.
Oliver, said James, has resource and sagacity.
Oliver, oh Oliver, may you be my favorite character in the entire show. I don't know about the book series, though. Yeah, this is kind of the weird thing about the Railway series. Like, I know everyone knows that Oliver's my favorite character, but in the books, not really. I mean, yeah, he's definitely in the top spot for sure. I mean, probably like number 2, maybe 3. But that's about it. But what can I say about his own centric story, along with another one we'll get to much later? Well, there's some really neat things I like about Oliver. I like how everyone praises Oliver for being that one engine saved from scrap, and like that, Oliver has a big head. He thinks that, well, if everyone thinks I am resourceful and sagacious, then so be it. I'll be like that because everyone just thinks I'm pretty cool. But what he doesn't realize is that not everyone's perfect. They make mistakes sometimes, and Oliver had his one big bad mistake that he had with the trucks on the turntable. And in the end, you do feel bad for Oliver because, like, he didn't intentionally fall down the turntable. Like, he was really trying to stop the trucks as best as he could, but unfortunately delayed Donald and Douglas in the turntable. And unlike the TV series, the Fat Controller actually scolds Oliver for his mistake, and that's how it ends. It's an ending where you feel bad for the character. And again, he didn't intentionally do it, but you do feel bad. But don't worry, he does have one story where he does redeem himself. Well, on to the next story.
Stupid thing.
And now we finally get to the very first story where Percy works on Thomas's branch line. And boy oh boy, it's a pretty fun one. I really like how fun the concept is. A helicopter and a little tank engine having this one race. I love Percy's interaction with Toby, and how just exciting the race is overall. And the funny thing is, even though it seems real that Harold would have won the race instantly because he's a helicopter, I love how Percy is the one that wins nonetheless. It's pretty nice, simple, fun, good story that I just really love reading. On to the next one.
Yaboo snubs!
Bulgy is definitely one of my favorite stories to read, and one that I just find pretty good. Why is that, you may ask? Well, this is actually one of the rare times where I actually prefer the Railway series version over the TV version. Which is no surprise, sometimes it happens when you read stories. But here are some neat things I really like about the Railway series version. I love how Bulgy is very boastful about the term free the roads, and he just riles up with Duck and Oliver. I'm pretty sure that scene was cut out due to timing, which I understand. And also the other neat thing is that they actually used this line in a later season episode called Free the Roads, which was written by Michael White, which I gotta give props to him. Yeah, I know, everyone doesn't like the Bubba series, but I give a little bit of credit to Michael White, though. He does at least try. Anyway, the other fun thing I really like about the Railway series version is that when Bulgy gets stuck under the bridge, in the book version, and this is not something the TV version, you see this long line of traffic on the road, and I'm pretty sure if this was made around like, I don't know, maybe like season 4, or if they actually had another side of the modeling set, oh, you bet the team would have had so much fun including so many road vehicle characters. Maybe even including Birdie that's just stuck in there, just waiting for Bulgy to move. I don't know, that would just be like really funny. But overall, I really like this one. I like how Duck is the one that saves the day, Oliver supports him, and they deal with a bully like Bulgy, who's just a big threat, and then just becomes a henhouse in the end. And in the books, that's it. TV series at least did something to him in the later season episode, but not in the books. The books are just like, nope, he's just a henhouse and move on. On to the next one. Ah, yes. These stories are pretty fun. You can tell this is why it's my favorite Branch Engine story, Bullseyes. But all these stories that are going to follow up with this one have one particular theme. Toby steals the show and he's the funniest character ever. Love him. And I really just appreciate how fun the story is. Daisy is snooty towards Toby. Toby gives no care. Daisy encounters a bull, tries to get the bull off the tracks, but is horrified, and Toby saves the day, and everyone makes fun of Daisy. That's the story. I love it. I love Toby. My god, he's like one of my favorite Railway series characters. And, yep, just a fun story nonetheless. On to the next one.
Fudge!
You know when I mentioned that Tramway Engines is a good book, and I'm just thankful that it exists? Well, this is the main reason why. It's the final 2 stories right there. And boy, oh boy, there's 2 things I love about it. First off, the introduction of Mavis. I like Mavis. No, seriously, I like her. She's a wonderful character to introduce. I really like how the TV series really pushed her as a character than the books, but oh my gosh, like, I'm just so thankful that she actually exists in the series. She's a young, feisty, chipper diesel that just tends to do things her own way and doesn't listen to Toby because she has no care in the world. And when Toby just gave her advice, Mavis doesn't listen and gets stuck at the level crossing. And the funniest part, in my opinion, is just Toby. Toby is such a mood in the series. I just really appreciate his character. The fact that in one scene, Toby is just at the sheds just grumbling about, oh, Mavis should have listened to me and I'm not going to help her. And then literally, as he's like puffing across to rescue Mavis, the sheds are in the background, meaning that Toby was 100 feet away. Like, he just watched Mavis struggle. Wow. Good God, I'm sorry, I just love Toby. Oh my god, he's easily one of my favorite Railway series characters. No question about that. But you do feel bad for Mavis, though, in the later story, but this is a fun one. I just love Toby. Toby's like the main reason why I love this story. And the introduction of Mavis. Also, 2 things I just want to point out real quick is there's 2 things I noticed. One, Daisy's in the scene and not Diesel like the TV series. And honestly, Daisy seems pretty neat. The other, well, Willie Rushington, you know how the station is named Farquhar in most interpretations, or Farquhar? Well, in this case, he calls the station Farker. Damn it, Railway series, you're too deep. Okay, on to the next one.
Treading the tightrope over the abyss.
So, I guess this is the finale. Yeah, okay, so this is kind of weird as a finale. Like, I get that the previous book feels very finale-esque, and this one was just made for obligation. And having Toby's Tightrope as the finale is kind of weird in my opinion. Now, what about the story? Oh, I still like it though. Yeah, I still think it's pretty good. And there's some things I really like about the story. One is, you do feel bad for Mavis, like she really wants to try to do good. And even when she made that mistake with the trucks and Toby was pushed by them, Mavis did manage to rescue Toby like a true badass. And like that, Mavis is promoted and does good at the end. And yeah, it's weird. Like, guys, this is the finale of Wilbert's books. That's it. After you read this book, it's like you're just kind of done. I don't know. As a finale, it doesn't work, but as a story, it does work. But I still like it. I still think it's pretty good, and it's a nice cap off. Like, I don't know. It's weird. It's I guess the series ended with Mavis and Toby. I don't know. That's just kind of weird. But my point is just a good story, one that I really like. On to the next one. I think everyone knew that this is my favorite Toby bantering with another engine story in the Wilbert's books. Yeah, it's Doubleheader. What can I say? I love how the story just starts off with James being boastful, and Toby doesn't even care about it. That's actually pretty funny. I love that. And what's even fun is when Toby ventures off the main line, and no one really knew Toby that much, so it's understandable why they made the mistake. But having James having to push Toby all the way to Croven's Gate is probably the funniest thing ever. And Toby just laughs it off. He knew that James was going to make an ass of himself in the story. Like, he just knew. And that's why I just love this story so very much. It's a fun one. It's my favorite of the Toby bantering stories. And glad it was James. On to the next one.
Quack, 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 wheesh!
Ah, yes, the final story where Percy's a station pilot and we're introduced to one of the other great characters in the series, Duck. I really love this story very much for how good it is. I love how Percy is very tired of being picked on the big engines. I love the Fat Controller wants to give him a new chance in life. We're introduced to Duck, and while the big engines are rude to Duck when he's first encountered, I love how both Percy and Duck team up together to stand up for the big engines. And they do. I really like that. It really shows how great of a character Duck would become. And probably, well, not a threat, but someone you don't want to mess around with the big engines here and there. And yeah, Duck is a really fun one. I can't wait to get to some more stories about him, but overall, a pretty good book. But we still have one more story in Percy the Small Engine, and it's my favorite of the stories.
A promise is a promise.
Now this is Percy's best story in the entire Railway series, and one that gets me very much. Percy's Promise is basically his redemption story, his true arc of a character, the final good Percy story we have, and one that is just very solid and wonderful. I love that Percy is doing everything he could to keep his promise to Thomas. And even though he had a banter with Harold, I love how it shows a different side of Harold, where he's not just some cocky helicopter that is rude to the tank engines or whatnot because he's superior, but he shows he can be very friendly and helpful. And he's owned by the Coastal Guard in Thomas's branch line. That's pretty cool, actually. That makes sense. I love that. And overall, it's just a really wonderful story. But I'm going to be real here. I'm not going to discuss this story alone. I actually had a few friends that are actually going to talk about some Railway series stories. And this is a special one I want to give to one of my friends. Hey, Diego, can you explain why this story is actually pretty good?
There's no shock that Percy is my favorite character, both in the TV series and the Railway series, and this story is a great example of why. I love how determined Percy is when he handles bad weather to keep his promise to Thomas. Heh, promise to Thomas, that's funny right there. I like how it shows a different side to Harold, where he's actually helpful rather than just snooty. And of course, one of the rare times Thomas is proud to have Percy do him a favor on his branch line, which is extremely rare in the books. Now, on to the next story.
Aren't you Patrick?
As much as I really enjoy Percy's Promise as a dire story, this one is just slightly better. And it's more of a redemption story with number 6. Number 6 is not available to pull passengers, and he's at his lowest and miserable point. Until one of the mountain climbers injure themselves, and he has to save the day. And with the help of that, he manages to rescue a passenger, and his name is Patrick. And like that, he got a new name, Patrick, which I find pretty baffling. I don't know why Patrick, maybe because the guy rescuing him is named Patrick, but yeah, he's now Patrick. That's his name. And I actually like that. It really shows of what the character's name was meant to be. Like, Lord Harry sounds like a pompous character name that doesn't sound like he wants to change or do better, and would often make mistakes. The name Patrick is more like a, I am gonna change, I am gonna do better, and I will. And that's what I like about the final story of Mountain Engines. And it's such a shame that they didn't make another Mountain Engines book in Chris's Audrey series, especially when it focuses on the Mountain Engine diesels, or maybe about the obscure engines that we don't know much about. But overall, good for Patrick, a character that I might not know of, especially in the books, but one that I can appreciate a lot more. On to the next one.
Oh, said Percy, sliding past the board.
Ah yes, the very first story illustrated by John T. Kenny. The Dalby series ended with a Percy story, but this one begins with a Percy story as a nice follow-up. And while I think the story is pretty good, and I really love everything about how fun the story is with Percy and Henry's bantering, there is one thing I really appreciate from this story, and that is the visuals, the illustrations. My God, I just love Percy's design. Easily my favorite Percy design in all of the Railway series. It's just night and day. And also this illustration one of them has is Smug Percy. How can I not love this story? It's awesome. But overall, it's a pretty good one. I like the message itself. I like how it calls back to Down the Mine, which is another fascinating story. And yeah, Percy's just really fun. Glad he got karma in the end, but great story. Absolutely love it. On to the next one.
Not bad. I've seen worse. At least you're all clean.
Bowled Out is the final story with Stepney's appearance overall. He does get mentioned a few times in the series, but this is the final appearance of him, and one that I feel is very gradual. A visiting Diesel named Bowler arrives on the island, and kind of like Diesel, but he leaves more of a bad impression than a good impression at start, where he's horrid, rude, and just cruel to the engines. And when he starts on trial, a bowler hat gets him his air intake and he breaks down. And that's about it with the Diesel. He's never brought up again and was just sent away. However, who was going to pull the Express was Stepney and Duck together, which I think is just really nice, just seeing these two engines. A Great Western Pannier and a Bluebell engine pulling the Express is pretty awesome. I know that many people would probably say if Thomas was part of it, it would have been nice, but I'm okay with just Stepney and Duck. I think they're just more better and superior in this scene. And the fact that Gordon compliments them at the end is very wholesome. See, Gordon's not an asshole all the time, or he's not just pompous or rude. He has good moments. He has nice moments. He's a character that people really like. And when Stepney leaves, it's sad, but it's still wholesome. Like, yeah, that's it. No more Stepney. But you could visit him in real life in Sussex, in the Bluebell Railway. But I think this one Stepney story I find more fun.
Our one and only ball!
Train Stop's Play is the most fun story that Stepney has ever had. I love how it first starts with him talking to the branch line engines, and when Stepney mentions he misses pulling trucks in his railway, everyone's just like, yeah, take the trucks, it's fine, go on, just help out Percy, whatever. And when Stepney does, he stops at a cricket field, and when the batsman hit one of the balls inside one of the trucks, and all of a sudden, Stepney leaves, and it's a wild goose chase of Caroline the car suffering miserably as an old, outdated car having to chase a steam engine just to get a cricket ball. I don't know why, that's just so funny. Even funnier is Stepney's driver and fireman thought, oh, they're just jokesters, so let's just make the situation much worse. And after Caroline breaks down and the ball is brought back, Stepney helps out at the end, and Caroline realizes that, you know, steam engines ain't so bad after all. They're good. A fun story, one that I just absolutely love, and it's just really great to read. Man, I really love Step in the Blue Bell Engine book. It's a good book. Not the greatest book, but it's a good book, and I like it. And you can just tell that the second half was more fun, and the first half showed the real stuff. Which again, makes this book good. If not, really good. On to the next one. Toad Stands By is a really good redemption story to Oliver himself. After his truck incident with the turntable, Scruffy, the leader of the trucks, decides to tease Oliver as the trucks sing along. And Duck does feel bad for him, but one neat thing I really like about this Railway Series take is how they handle Toad the brake van. I love that scene when Toad interacts with Douglas, and like that, Toad knows exactly how to handle one of the trucks, being Scruffy. And it literally suggests Oliver to rip him apart, which he does. Oh man, I can't believe Toad would actually do that. Can we just admit that Toad is secretly scary in the books? I don't know, maybe that's just a me thing. But overall, the other neat thing I also really like about it, aside from that, are some visual illustrations. I like how literally when Oliver rips the truck, Duck is just mortified. He would just be the type of engine that would just say, well, that's certainly not the Great Western Way. I wouldn't do such a thing like that. Definitely not. And this might be just me, but in that final illustration with Scruffy where he's broken apart and you see that claw over there, I don't know about you guys, but is that supposed to be Diesel 10? I don't think it is, but could you imagine if it was Diesel 10? You imagine like secretly he was a Railway Series character? Overall, a really nice story. One that I just really like to read from time to time. It's really good, but we still got a couple more stories to go. On to the next one.
It's Skarloey.
Ah, yes, the very first story that introduces the Skarloey Railway itself. And this is going to be a kind of a common thing in these next few stories, but all of them have one big theme, and it's introducing something very new, the story. And we get to the very first one, which is the Skarloey Railway. That's a pretty nice one. I like how Edward and Skarloey are the only main characters in here. It explains Renee is going to be sent away to get mended. We get briefly introduced to Sir Handel Peter Sam, what the Skarloey Railway's like, and a story about Skarloey with a passenger named Miss Last, who is always last on board, and he has to wait for them. And also, I just really like how his coaches are characters. Yeah, the 5 coaches right there are just pretty neat. And I like how most of them are just snobby and rude, and Skarloey gives no care. But he does care for Beatrice, the brake coach, and honestly, that's pretty sweet. It's just a wonderful, simple, and fine story with these 2 old geezers right here. One that's listening to a very fascinating story about a railway that may not be real, but a railway nonetheless that can also be an inspiration to a real place, and one I really wish to go one day. On to the next one.
The bluebells are coming, oh ho, 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 the bluebells are coming.
You know, in a way, as much as Train Stops Play is a fun story, this is my personal favorite of the Step in the Blue Bell Engine book, Bluebells of England. It's not because Stepney is introduced and why he's visiting Sodor is my favorite. No. The real reason why this is my favorite of the stories is one thing. what's been happening in British rails in the 1960s. And for steam engine, it's devastating. Steam engines are being scrapped one by one, feeling cold, lonely, and miserable. And that scene with Percy and Douglas talking about scrap is pretty sad. It's devastating. But fortunately, there's hope. A preserved railway for steam engines to be saved and work well. Take the Bluebell Railway, for example, with Stepney, the very first engine saved from scrap in British rails. And while they did save other engines, it's nice that Stepney is protected by many people in the Bluebell Railway. And any diesel passed by and they were just cold and gruesome with them, well, they can't, because, well, the truth is, they can't scrap him. He's a steam engine that's saved. And at the end, he visits Sodor. That's the story. I think the sad part of the story is just the best part. That's what I like about the Gunvor and Peter Edwards books, which, as the very first story, I love it. It's good, but oh man. There's just so many things I like about Gunvor and Peter Edwards. Mainly the illustrations of the engines are peak, and just the stories. The fact that this is the first story and they mention, yeah, bad shit's happening to steam engines and British rails. It's so deep and complex. A wonderful story. Really good. Now on to the next batch of stories.
Real? Of course we're real. We bring all the ballast.
Ah yes, the introduction to the miniature railway engines. And I gotta say, this is one I actually really like as a good story. I mean, where do I even begin? The fact that Duck of all characters is exploring this new railway is pretty fascinating. And I like how it's establishing the Little Western being built. Then we have 3 engines introduced named Rex, Mike, and Bert, and immediately we know what their personalities are like just into this introduction itself. And that's about what the story is. It's just an introduction story. But that's why I think it's a really good story, because it introduces so many great things that I appreciate. Anyway, on to the next story.
You are to take us to the top of Coldy Fell.
I know that the Coldy Fell Railway doesn't get that much attention, and that some people wouldn't find the book good and maybe pointless. But I just want to tell you guys one thing. Despite all of that, I don't hate Mountain Engines as a book. I love it, and the stories itself are wonderful. Now, why do I like this story more than the other 2? Well, one answer. World building. This is just amazing. I would never expect that Sodor would make a separate mountain railway alongside with the Skarloey Railway, but they did. And it's been an old railway that's ran in the very early 20th century, with Coldy being the main engine. And this is more like his story of his first trial, and it worked out pretty well. They do mention the other characters too, and there is one story I do want to talk about, but that's going to be an A tier. But overall, a good introduction. One of those things I also love is he's interacting with the narrow gauge engines, and I just love how Duncan and Sir Handel are just miserable and are just odd about the engine. And Skarloey is just like, yep, that's an engine, and I like it for just being an engine. So yeah, a pretty good one. One that I really like to read. Now, on to the next one.
The Little Western it will always be.
I cannot wait for the day when I finally get the chance to talk about my favorite stories in the Railway series once we get to one of the best books of all time. But even though, and hear me out, even though I really, really love this book, and I love all the stories, the last one is just a nice cap off to everything. And I think a lot of people dubbed this story as the finale story for all the mainline or the steam engines from the main series. What do I mean by that? So what happens? Well, Flying Scotsman leaves and everyone has a farewell party. Douglas arrives to tell about the time he saved an engine from scrap, which they all chip in. The Fat Controller agrees. Bear is purchased and now works in the railway. Duck and Oliver run the little western, and that's about it. That's about what happens in the story, and it's just a nice cap off to everything. It seemed like everyone redeemed and are just characters. And that's the point. That's why it's such a good story. And one I put very high in B tier. We still got a couple more to go, but man, this one's just so good. Really like this one. Anyway, on to the next one.
Once an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain.
Wow, I can't believe we're high on the list for the very first book of the stories of 3 railway engines. Okay, well, here's something fascinating about this story. This story, in particular, is a very interesting one. One that many people would find very unrealistic and so out of place. But you know what? That's why I actually really like this book, because of how crazy it is. But it's a very clever story that introduces one of the other great characters in the series, Henry. And while we don't know much about his origins just yet, this is a really nice introduction to this really pompous and snobby character that honestly doesn't really care much about life. It was one of the reasons why he's actually one of my favorites, if I'm being honest here. But yeah, it's just a wonderful story about Henry, about his introduction, and a really sad ending. But when you kind of think about it, is it really that sad? Because, I'll be honest, he kind of deserved what he got until we get to the next story. But my point is, this is just a really good startup story for this engine, and I can't wait to see more of him as we go on. But yeah, nice introduction and a nice character. Moving on.
I'm going to poop at Henry.
And now we get to the second part of Henry's story, and this one's just a really nice one. Originally, this wasn't meant to be a story in the Railway series, but the publishers demanded to have one final story where Henry comes out of the tunnel and introduces so many other things. I think technically this is the story that introduced Gordon. Like, I know Edward and Gordon exist, but I feel like this is the very first story that introduces him. And honestly, him breaking down while bursting his safety valve is pretty fun, and it shows how weak and vulnerable Edward is at the start, where he can't pull the express anymore. And like that, Henry got to get out of the tunnel and pull a passenger train with Edward, which at the end is very satisfying very well. And one thing that's only exclusive in the books is, after that, Henry is painted blue at some time, which I don't blame the TV series crew just keeping him green, because, I mean, he does eventually become green later on. But overall, a pretty solid story, one that I just really enjoy. It's a good story, a good end to the 3 railway engines, and one I would actually cherish very much. But we'll get to those first 2 stories much later.
Branch lines are vulgar.
Ah yes, the final story that I consider really good by Gunvor and Peter Edwards. And it's easily one that I just really like reading. Wrong Road. There is something I really appreciate about this story in particular. Edward and Gordon. They've been going through for so long, and this one is just absolutely hilarious. One thing I really appreciate about the illustrations itself is this. In the story of Edward and Gordon, we see an illustration where Gordon is rather boastful and a hotshot and thinks he's all everything, and Edward just looks surprised and spooked. Gunvor and Peter Edwards did a similar illustration like this, and it looks more realistic, and one where Gordon is very snooty, and Edward has no care. He just laughs it off just like that. It's easily one of my favorite illustrations in the Railway series. But then we get to the funniest part in the story itself. What happened? Well, this is just funny. So at night, a new fireman is looking up in Gordon's cab to see if the flag is all green, but instead he sees a green floppy hat that was given to an old lady that she was waving to a friend. And like that, the fireman just literally pulls Gordon's lever and just leaves everything behind the station. And to add insult to that, Gordon had to go backwards to fetch his coaches again. Then Edward had to go, and he had to go first And then he's sent on the main line, and Gordon accidentally goes on the branch line. They all have to go back. Edward takes the passengers to the right destination. Gordon does, and he gets so exhausted he sleeps at Brandon Docks. I'm sorry, this story is just, well, funny. I really like this story. Like, it's really good, and I just like it. That's why I just like this story. It's just so good. And at the end, we see Bill and Ben teasing Gordon, threatening from scrap. Oh, wow. And then, like, Boko arrives, and the only thing that Gordon is proud about is Boko saves him like a knight in shiny armor. A steam engine begging a diesel to save him, especially Gordon, is absolutely amazing. And this is actually the final time in Wilbert's books, or even the rest of the Railway series, where Gordon, who was once this pompous engine who tended to make mistakes, doesn't anymore. He's good friends with Boko now and respects him for who he is. And it's a very sweet story, one that I just really like. It's just so good. We still got some Gunvor and Peter stories in the later Railway series in A tier. But don't worry, we're gonna get there, hopefully, to A tier soon, I hope. On to the next one.
Oh, yes, I like children.
Wow, I can't believe we're finally in a story in Edward the Blue Engine, and it's one that I actually say is really good. Close to being great, but really good is good enough. What can I say? I really love this story very much, as it introduces so many things. The concept of scrapping, and most importantly, my favorite Edward line in the entire series, which is...
People say I'm old-fashioned, but I don't care.
That line still gets me every single time. I just love it. It's just Edward in a nutshell. God, he's my favorite. But what else can I say? It's a nice simple one. I like how Edward does everything he could to save this traction engine from scrap, and he does at the end. And sadly, in the Railway series, this was his only appearance in the Wilbert stories, which I know has been a common thing. I know Wilbert Audrey really didn't care that much for the road vehicles. I know. But in the end, it's a pretty good one that I definitely enjoy. On to the next one.
Look out for the train.
Wow, I can't believe we're now discussing stories about Thomas the Tank Engine in B tier. Like, you know how the previous two were like in C tier a long while back, and we're now in number 30? Yeah, insane. But anyway, why do I really like the other half of Thomas the Tank Engine a lot more than, well, the other two? Because this is really the start of Thomas's redemption arc of what he's trying to do. And this one is him pulling trucks, which doesn't turn out pretty well. And I gotta be honest, the striking visuals in that scene makes it very impacting and terrifying for him. Like, I'd like to believe this is one of the scariest moments that Thomas had to encounter in his entire life. And while I don't mind the jazzy theme that is played in the classic series, I really wish the scene when Thomas was a runaway sounded more dire, suspenseful, and very tense. But you know what, it's fine, I get it. But at least he didn't crash though. Though we'll get to one other story about him eventually. You'll see. But it's a pretty damn good one in my opinion. On to the next one.
We want a proper engine, not a red monster.
We finally completed all of the James the Red Engine stories on number 29 on the list. And this one is Troublesome Trucks, which, I'm gonna be honest, is my favorite James Railway series story, and one that I really enjoy. Like, unlike the other story about Thomas and the trucks, this is more of a redemption story or a triumphant story. And honestly, I really love it so much. This is really James at his very best, and even with one slip up, he does everything he could to prove himself as a useful engine. Now I know that Thomas and the Breakdown Train seems like a very satisfying story about a redemption arc story, but this one right here, character-wise, does a very great job with James. We'll get to his introduction story much later, but my point is, this is just so much better than Thomas and the Trucks, and I really love how triumphant it really feels. And while I hate to say that Dalby's illustrations aren't that great, at least this story is a very good one. and one that I would absolutely love to read from time to time. Hands down, one of my favorite James stories. Now then, on to the next one.
Once upon a time.
105 stories, and we're at number 28 in the very first story, Edward's Day Out. I think it's clear to say why the Railway series was really good as a startup story, and this is honestly one of the best ones introduced. The fact we're introduced to not Thomas, but a different character named Edward, who was the very first character of the Railway series, really shows how much of a character he has involved. I really love how simple it is. Like, it's a simple story about Edward feeling left out because he's outdated, and his driver and fireman arrive to make him very useful again by pulling a passenger train. And what's really neat about this story is something happens. Like, the guard is not there, and Edward is impatient, which shows there's little bits of flaw with this character. Not a bad flaw, but like a simple flaw that can be easily fixed. And at the end, he just pulls a passenger train successfully. I don't know why, but this is just a wonderful introduction story, and one I really love and cherish. But don't worry, we'll get to his next story very soon. Trust me. I am a massive fan of this character, and maybe there might be one story about him that is very special. But I won't spoil it because it'll happen. Trust me, it'll happen.
His brake blocks were on fire.
And now we finally finished every single story in Thomas the Tank Engine. I know we're still in B tier, but we'll still get to A tier eventually. But my god, this is one of my favorite, if not the best Thomas-centric story in the Railway series. What a growth he really had in the books. And what's really neat about this story, it takes place a year after the events of Thomas and the Trucks. Meaning at some point at some time, he's learned, he's changed, he's grown. And like that, he really has. After James had a horrific crash on his first day, Thomas doesn't hesitate but brings the breakdown train and saves the entire day on Sodor. And like that, he gets a branch line. The one thing he strived for the most. The one thing that wanted to make him really useful. And in the end, he finally got it. And while his other stories are just simple and fun stories, and some I just find okay, this is the true end to Thomas's arc in the Railway series. One that's just absolutely satisfying, and one I would read from time to time. This is why Thomas the Tank Engine book is one of the best introduction books ever made. One I had fond childhood memories with, and ones that I just really enjoyed reading. And in the end, this one, it's just too good of a story. I want to put this in A tier, but I think near A tier works fine as a B tier story. On to the next one.
A goods train, a goods train, a goods train.
The very last story in 3 Railway Engines is number 26 on the list. And I have to say, this is absolutely mind-blowing of a story. I mean, the part of it is, this is on number 26. We are almost done with B tier right now. We're getting there. We're getting to A tier. But do you see my point? Do you see why I really enjoy this as an introduction story of one of my favorite characters? Because it also introduces my other favorite character in the Railway series, Gordon. And this is a wonderful contrast between the two. You can really tell that this is going to be one of the best arcs ever made for both characters. With Edward, it's a simple, but it's a brilliant one, and Gordon is a very complex and wonderful character, as we'll see what happens when it goes on. And you're probably wondering to yourselves, have I already mentioned the Gordon books yet? We'll get there, trust me, we will. It's not a B tier, and you'll see why. But yeah, a wonderful story about Edward and Gordon. And another thing I also really like about this is this was technically the very first story that Wilbert Awdry had inspiration in a real life event. And that just speaks volume about how great this story really is. It really shows that the very first two stories are some of the strongest stories ever made. And I gotta be honest, I really enjoy these stories very much. I want to put this in A tier so bad, but I still think it's still worthy of a B tier good story. And we only have a few more to go before we get to A tier. But trust me, these stories are just so fun. Well, that marks our checklist for 3 railway engines, so we got a couple more to go.
Disgraceful. Disgusting. Despicable.
Guys, we're near the end. Only this and one more story and we're finished with B tier finally. And I gotta say, Dirty Work is a really clever story. I love how after the events of Pop Goes the Diesel, this is the shining moment where Diesel decides to pay Duck out. And how does he do it? By framing him, making him think like he's horrid to the big engines. And I gotta say, this is a very wonderful story. Because instead of the typical, oh, Diesel got caught and Duck is a good engine at the end, no. This time, it's Diesel that won and Duck that lost. A villain winning over the hero. But this is where it gets more fascinating. You think that Diesel may be the villain, but while he is, he's not just the villain. Duck is also the antagonist in that story too, along with the previous one. And this is why I love this book. There is no one's good, one bad, and that's it. It's a gray line. Diesel starts off good, but then after the incident, he decides to play nasty with Duck. Well, Duck is the one that started the whole conflict because he hates Diesels. This is just wonderful. I really love how they handled the story so well. And the fact that Duck lost, it's just beautiful. He does have one story. I'll get to that eventually when we get to the A tier spots, but so far, a really good story. But we still have one more to go. Oh my god, we finally did it. We're in the last story of B tier. Oh my god, this is the 68th book we just finished talking about in B tier. Okay, let's not get distracted. Let's talk about the story. Pop Goes the Diesel is a near A tier story, but I still find it as a B tier story nonetheless. But there is one thing I really appreciate in this story, or the book itself, Duck and the Diesel Engine, the introduction of Diesels. And this is what I was talking about earlier. I love how Diesel starts off as a good impression, where he just wants to do good and be useful. And what else is really fascinating is that everyone is annoyed about Duck's boastfulness after the City of Churros visit. I also find it funny that Edward's one of the engines that's pissed. Thank God Edward is a character, I love him. But the neat thing about this story is when Diesel talks about the Diesel Revolution. And Duck has no care in the world until Diesel makes a fool of himself with the troublesome trucks. And Duck just laughs it off like an ass. And I gotta say, Duck's behavior in this one is just so mean. But that's why I actually love this story, because, well, Duck started the whole villain conflict, and Diesel becomes a villain at some point. What is sad, though, is, well, Diesel never really appeared after those two stories. Only mentioned the final story, which I'll get to later. But yeah, Diesel was just a one-off character, I would say. Not like in the TV series where he became a recurring character to a main staple character, especially in the CGI series. But overall, a really good story in the Railway series. And we've done it, folks. We're going to A tier.